generation has to take them in for itself. Because if principles aren't alive in our hearts, they die. So it really doesn't matter that the Constitution gave the power to the people. It doesn't matter that technically, theoretically, it's in our hands. If it's not in our hearts anymore, it's not in our minds anymore. If it's not in our hearts and it's not in our minds anymore, we stop having the capacity to say to whomever it needs to be said to, stop right there. You did it to my grandparents. You're not going to do it to my kids. Yeah. And that's what Constitution is. You know, my dad used to say, watch out, kids. The bastards are always at the door. And that's what's happened. We've lost our vigilance. We've lost our rambunctiousness. We've lost this sense of ongoing rebellion and revolution, which is what it means to be American. You don't get to just set up your democracy and then take it for granted and figure somebody else is handling it. You don't take care of your marriage. Don't go being surprised if you lose your marriage. You don't take care of your health. Don't go being surprised if you start losing your health. You don't take care of your business. Don't go being surprised if you lose your business. I think this last 2 years has been such a wake-up call. It's like, whoa. But if we're honest with ourselves, there's a level on which, what did we expect? Because as soon as we began acquiescing to a system that made the businessman God, then it was inevitable that the most twisted, perverse version of that would arise in our midst. That's actually what has happened. See, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not prosecuting a case against Donald Trump. I am prosecuting a case against the system that produced him. Yes, we have a bigger job than just to defeat Donald Trump. Donald Trump did not create our biggest problems so much as our biggest problems created Donald Trump. And if all we do is white knuckle it and defeat him, which we must do, don't get me wrong. But if that's all we do, they'll be back. They'll be back in 22. They'll be back in 24. We need to do more than defeat Donald Trump. We need to end, without doubt, straight on end, an aberrational chapter in American history and usher in a new one. Why? Because we say so. The only way to override such an immoral force is with a moral force. The only way to override a political force which is uplifted and which is fostered by collectivized hatred, collectivized racism and bigotry and anti-Semitism and homophobia and xenophobia and Islamophobia. These things have always been with us in the United States. It's not like any intelligent observer thought we didn't have things like that. But many of us are old enough to remember a time when we thought we had reached a consensus in this country that there were limits past which we would not go. We thought we had reached limits on both left and right that serious political megaphones would not be given to such as they. Well, the levees have fallen. Partly they've fallen because of social media, which gives anybody a megaphone, and partly they've fallen because we have a person of no less power than the presidency of the United States who is not above stoking those powers for his own political purposes. Now, I remember reading an interview with Jared Kushner. He said 2 or 3 years before the last election, he was sitting with his father-in-law at McDonald's, which I get stuck on that every time. And he said to his father-in-law, there are a lot of very angry people in this country, and we could harness all that and make you president. And I thought to myself, there are so many wonderful people in this country. There are so many wonderful, dignified, decent, compassionate, loving people. We could harness all that and change the world. Starting with the United States of America. But if you're going to harness your love, you've got to get real. I don't have a problem with the American people. The American people are cool. We're good. I'm not saying we're better than anybody else, but there's just as much goodness, decency, etc. here as anywhere else. The problem is that over the last few decades, the conversation, the inquiry into what goodness means, compassion means, love means, integrity means, character, it's become too much just within the purview of our own personal relationships. in our own personal systems. We've stopped asking what is good tax policy, what is good foreign policy, what is justice, what is mercy, what is conscience in anything other than our personal relationships. So it's not like they're more hate-filled people than loving people. Of course there are more loving people than hateful people in the United States, by far. But those who hate today with conviction. They are serious, they are not kidding, and they are convicted. And conviction is a force multiplier. The problem is not that more people hate than love. The problem is, however, that those of us who love need to start loving with as much conviction as is now demonstrated by those who hate. And if we're going to be serious about love, then we cannot toe the line like a bunch of Stepford citizens with a political system that talks about everything except what is most deeply true. Because if we're going to talk about what is most deeply true, we're going to talk about the depth of corruption in our government. We're going to talk about the depth of corruption by which a virulent form, I'm not saying capitalism, I'm saying a virulent form of capitalism, has so infected the sinews of even how our government operates that short-term profits for stockholders take advocacy above the people, above our health, above our well-being, our children's education. At what point does this stop unless the people step in? And when we do those things, when we have a moral economy, when we realize how important it is to repeal that tax cut, when we realize how important it is to stop those subsidies by which we gave, what, $26 billion last year alone to oil and gas? Why? $26 billion. We need to realize we need to put back in the tax cut, stop the subsidies, stop the military spending that is unnecessary, that has nothing to do except for short-term profits for defense contractors. We have to be able to say to the United States government, which actually negotiated away, it gave away to big pharmaceutical companies its own right to negotiate for lower drug prices. We have to say to billionaires, many of whom agree with this, 3%. We want 3% on your assets. We need to say to people who have $50 million and more, many of whom agree with us, we want 2%. We want 2% of your assets. Why? Because then, at that point, we're going to have some cash on hand. And when we have some cash on hand, we are going to do the right thing by the people of the United States of America. I'm not going to accept the fact that we have rebased our primary educational funding on property taxes, so that if a child is born into a wealthy neighborhood, they have a very, very fine, or even a fine middle-class neighborhood, a child will have a very fine chance of a high-quality public school education. But if a child doesn't, then that child has a lower chance of a high-quality education. If you want to see the entrepreneurial spirit and genius of the United States, if you want to see the fuel that will give us the most amazing peace and the most amazing prosperity over the next 10, 20, and 30 years, I'll tell you where it is. It's not in the wind, it's not in the sun, it's not in the ground, it's in the brain of every child in America. Our greatest opportunity for peace and prosperity is to fully actualize the brain power of America's young. And that is why we need a department of children and youth. And in order to build peace, we need to wage peace, not just endlessly prepare for war. Right now, we have $750 billion in our military budget. Go with me here, because this math is important. It's your money. $750 billion for your defense department, for your military. Then you have your State Department. So your State Department is diplomacy and development and mediation. So any chance we have of waging peace would come through the State Department. Military gets $750 billion. State Department gets $40 billion. Now within the State Department is $17 billion that is given to the USAID for humanitarian assistance, and then less than $1 billion is given to the peace-building agencies. Now, the peace-building agencies are those which provide those factors that statistically indicate there will be a greater incidence of peace and a lower incidence of violence. And none of these factors are going to surprise anybody. Number one, economic opportunities for women. Number two, greater educational opportunities for children. Number three, reduced violence against women. And number four, the amelioration of unnecessary human suffering wherever possible. We should see large groups of desperate people as a national security risk. We should recognize desperate people do desperate things. What do you think's happening at the border, other than the fact that those people who are so desperate that they would do anything to come to a place where maybe they could live freely and without violence in their midst? We should recognize that large groups of desperate people are more vulnerable to ideological psychological capture by genuinely psychotic forces. But you see, ladies and gentlemen, waging peace doesn't make a lot of corporate profits. So in a corporatist agenda, where basically everything is more based on what makes short-term profits for this matrix of corporatists rather than us, it's not going to change until you and I insist that it does. That's why I'm running for president. I'm running for president because I completely challenge the idea that only those, look at the game that is being played here. We're to believe that only people whose careers have been entrenched for decades in the limitations of the system that drove us into this ditch are qualified to lead us out of it. I challenge that. I challenge that because that's not what the U.S. Constitution says. The U.S. Constitution says for someone to be president, they have to be 35, got that. Had to have been born here, got that. Had to have lived here for 14 years. And if the Constitution, if the founders had wanted to say that the president had to have been a governor or a senator or a congressperson, then it would have. It didn't, because they wanted to leave it to every generation to decide for itself the skill set that generation feels is necessary to navigate the times. Politician. You mean like all those experienced politicians who led us into Iraq and into Vietnam and agreed with those who did?
Exactly.
No, I don't necessarily have some of their qualifications, but let me tell you something, they don't have mine. Because let me tell you what my qualifications are that I bring to this race. Some radical truth telling. Because I've had a 35-year career working with people in crisis. People don't usually come to me because things are going well. And what they know and what I know. And people come to me when they're ready to just lay it on the table and let's get real and stand naked before the truth. And that's what's really happening. We're going to talk about how we want the blessings of an abundant future in this country when we're not looking at the deep underbelly of this country. It can't happen. Cause and effect happens for countries just like cause and effect happens for individuals. We have some serious problems. We have to recognize we have some serious problems. On the other side of these problems are unlimited possibilities. But those unlimited possibilities cannot happen until you get real and face where you're not who you say you are. You're not who you say you are when you let millions of American children live with chronic anxiety, chronic all the time. You're not who you say you are when you have a foreign policy which has more to do with corporate agenda than with any kind of moral leadership in the world. You're not who you say you are when you spend so much money on ways to kill people and so little in comparison on ways to make people's lives better. And you are not who you say you are, and you cannot have the future you want until you're willing to clean up the past and pay reparations for slavery, reparative measures to Native Americans, and start a new chapter. Navigate through these times. These are very, very turbulent waters, but we can do this. But you can only navigate through turbulent times, whether you're an individual or a country, is if you find out what your principles are and you stick with them. You can't just go around trying to fix it over here and trying to fix it over there. You got to get real, and you got to get true, and you got to return to your principles. And that's why all domestic and international policy, in my view, should be based on one core principle: what can government do to help people thrive? Our foreign policy, that's about our environmental policy. I mean, hello, given the fact that if we do not address climate change in a way that literally reverses it over the next 12 years, we don't even know if our grandchildren will be able to breathe on this planet. You know, there are so many people who say, oh, Marianne, you're so naive. You go on and on about how the love of power should be replaced by the power of love. And you go on and on about how the fact that we need to make love, not economics, our organizing principle. Oh, Marianne, you're so naive. And then we know you believe in God, so by definition you must be less sophisticated and less intellectual. And we know that makes you wacky, all that stuff. Let me tell you, they think I'm naive. They're naive to think we're going to even exist on this planet for another 100 years if we do not make this transition. And if you know what life is about, life isn't just about what happens to you. Life is about who you choose to be once it's happened to you. Life is not just about what happens to us, but our responsibility to what happens to us. You are the first primary in this country. I don't need to tell you, they know it, interestingly enough. We need to remember it. You're the deciders.
Yes.
You're the deciders. It should not be the DNC that's the decider. It should not be any of the gatekeepers. It should not be the political media industrial complex. We should not be Stepford politicians just talking about what they say we should talk about, talking about the issues that they say we should talk about. None of that. This has got to be over. That's not how democracy was supposed to work. The consciousness of the American people is fine. In poll after poll, you can see it. We're actually left of center. We're fine. We're fine. We're no better or worse than any other country. The problem is the gap, the dangerous, the critical gap that now exists between the consciousness of the American people and the way our government operates. So to look to our government, the way it operates, even a better version of same old, to fix itself, it's not going to happen. That's just not how it happens. What happens is that the people rise up and the people step in. I want a United States Department of Peace. I want us to remember on a day like today, 400 years to the day, 400 years to the day, after the ships brought the first enslaved people over here, we need to remember that people can be redeemed. People can be redeemed and so can nations. But you have to get real. You have to atone and you have to make amends. A lot of racial reconciliation is a matter of atonement. That's why everybody's talking about deep inner work of white privilege, etc. But that's not quite enough. Because if you owe me $1,000, as much as I might appreciate that you feel bad and I might appreciate that you have apologized, I'd also like my money back. That's how I see it. It's not my belief and it's not my experience that the average American is a racist. No, that's not my belief. But I do believe the average American is woefully undereducated about the history of race in this country. And so if you actually look at the fact that there were 250 years of slavery, ladies and gentlemen, so really allow yourself to take in, we're talking abject slavery. That 250 years was followed by another 100 years of institutionalized violence against blacks in the United States. This is 350 years. That's longer than this country has been in existence. There was an economic gap, understandably, at the end of the Civil War between blacks and whites. 40 acres and a mule was at that time promised to every former slave family of 4. That promise was rescinded, and even during that 100 years, when black wealth would begin to be accumulated, there were state, local, and federal efforts that would be made throughout this country to thwart those efforts. As Martin Luther King would say 100 years after the end of the Civil War, they were freed, but what were they freed to? And so in 1964, for those of you too young to remember, in 1964, this country passed the Civil Rights Act. With the Civil Rights Act, they dismantled segregation. In 1965, they passed the Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act ensured black people the equal opportunity to vote, but since 2013, the John Roberts-led Supreme Court has been chipping away at the Voting Rights Act, and that's why we have the spate of voter suppression efforts all over this country today. What we have not addressed is the economic gap, which is still there. There was an article that came out the other day, CBS, saying that if black families had as much wealth as white families, and when we're talking about this, we're also talking about even black people who have the same level of education, but where there is a diminished return on that educational achievement. If black people were able to create wealth at the same level as white people in this country, it is estimated that our economy would actually be $1.5 trillion larger. When we talk about reparations for slavery, be very clear here. We're not talking about a cost, we're talking about a benefit. Because just as Germany has paid that $89 billion since the Holocaust, if we pay what I recommend, which is $200 to $500 billion, to be spent over 20 years, the stipulation on the part of the U.S. government would be for purposes of educational and economic renewal. The money would be dispersed by a reparations council that would be obviously carefully chosen of people who themselves have done scholarly, cultural, and political work on this topic, people such as Professor Sandy Darity at Duke University. If I owe you money, I don't get to tell you how to spend it. So other than the purview and the stipulation that the money is to be spent for educational and economic renewal, it is to be that group of people who then decide whether it is historically black colleges, whether it is black chambers of commerce, whether it is small black businesses, whether it's Gary, Indiana, whether it's Detroit, whether it's Cleveland. That would not be for us to say, and that is part of the spiritual and moral power. None of this continued paternalistic narrative where we mess with you, now we'll tell you how you get fixed. That's exactly the kind of colonial thinking that needs to stop. Therefore, and so this is important that we recognize the difference between reparations and race-based policies. Race-based policies, I don't like race-based policies. Race-based policies leaves open the question of whose fault this is. Reparations takes a much deeper moral step forward because reparations is an acknowledgement, it's an inherent mea culpa. It's an acknowledgement of a wrong that has been done, a debt that is owed, and the willingness on the part of a generation of Americans to pay it. That will release power, will release spiritual power, will release psychological power, will release emotional power, and this generation will be looked back on as the generation that got this done. Ladies and gentlemen, Americans are not tired because we're doing too much. We're tired because we're not doing enough important things. It is time. You know what Americans are like? Americans are like a big airplane. You put it in the air and it's like, whoa! But when it's on the runway, it's kind of this clunky, huge piece of metal. You look at a great sports car, right? And if it's just like hanging out in the neighborhood, it's like you can't see what it's about. You put it on the open highway, whoa! Americans need to stop it with the getting small things done. We need to get stuff done. We need to have solutions. I want to go to sleep. And I'm up there on stage and I want to go to sleep. We got to wake up. We got to be big. We got to be bold. We got to do great things. And then let's do what every generation before us has done. This has been true of the United States since the beginning of this country. We don't like to have government in our face. We don't want to have to think about it all the time. But every 40 years, a generation rises up, looks at the government and says, what the hell are you guys doing? And we fix it, and then we go back to our lives. We partied until this point. We have a job to do now. We need to fix it. We need to show up. We can get this done. It's not going to happen easily, and it's not going to happen quick, but it's going to happen. And at the end of that, each and every one of us will die. We know. We did it while we were here. Thank you very much. Should I do that? Yes. Congressman Paul Hodes, he was your congressman here. He's also head of the Marianne Williamson President campaign here in New Hampshire. But Paul tells me I should take a couple questions before we do that. Anybody have any questions?
Yes,
absolutely.
What?
Yeah, Marianne.
I do. How would American policy towards the International Criminal Court change?
Well, as you know, we're not signed on to the criminal court, are we? Why do you think that is? And this gentleman makes a very good point. The United States is not signed on to the criminal court. That's in The Hague, I think, right? And we're not because kind of obvious reasons, probably starting with Guantanamo Bay. There are a lot of reasons why we wouldn't be. So let me tell you, first of all, as you know, I understand exactly what you're saying, and I know how wrong it is. On the other hand, I am running for president, so I'm not going to make blanket statements, because there's a chance I'll win. So what I can do... is that I know what you're talking about. I know exactly the issue you're talking about. If I win, I don't want to go into the American intelligence agencies and have them feel that I had taken stances sort of against them before I even got there. But what I can tell you is you elect me president, I'm very hip to the subject, and one of the first things I'll do is ask what the hell's going on that we're not part of that court.
What's your position on empire?
I'm sorry?
What's your position on empire?
On empire?
The empire we live in.
Well, we're not supposed to be one.
That's right.
We have become one. Our main imperialistic venture, however, is economic. So let's talk about this. The way the United States works as empire is not geographic as in the old days. It is economic. And so what happens is that you have a government which, for all the reasons that I was talking about today, working as handmaiden to the economic imperialists, okay? And that's just what a corporatist agenda is. It's not even personal. And so what has happened is that American foreign policy, just like American domestic policy, has been infected by the corporatist agenda. And so today, what's happening in India and Kashmir is an example. What is happening in Hong Kong is an example. What has happened to this country? We used to be a country. The United States would be making a very bold statement right now. The United States would be making a very bold statement that we stand for the principles of democracy. You see, ladies and gentlemen, it's not like anybody's naive enough to think we've ever had it all right. But many of us grew up in a time where there was at least the understanding we were supposed to try. That's the thing. So there was a time in this country where the United States would now be making a very serious statement that we stand for the forces of democracy in Kashmir. The United States would be making a very strong statement that we support the forces of democracy in Hong Kong. Now, there would be voices saying, well, we're pretty hypocritical given what we did. But I'll take the days when we had to deal with whether or not we were hypocritical, as opposed to today where we don't even say anything. Don't even say anything. And let us be very clear, the dictators of the world, no, this is what Trump has done, is to open the door, because all the people that want to run these awful authoritarian games know, well, the United States isn't going to say anything. Whether it's Modi, whether it's Netanyahu, whether it's Erdogan, they have our guys on their side. And my problem with this campaign, we're not even going to discuss this, guys. You guys over at MSNBC and CNN and ABC, all your moderators, weren't going to ask any questions about that?
Yeah, exactly.
Never.
Well,
Never.
I'm going to talk about what the guys meant. And then this lady here.
I appreciate all of your criticism of the industrial complex, military industrial complex. It's all very refreshing to hear. But there is one journalist who is being prosecuted, or will be soon, by the Trump administration.
Julian Assange. I knew you were going to go there.
I haven't heard you speak about it in the past, but it sounds like you're developing your position. Do you have a stance on Julian Assange to give to us tonight?
I would say to you on that, you know, it goes back to what we were saying before. I'm tilting in the direction of, if you're going to stand for whistleblowers, you stand for whistleblowers.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Integrity.
That's a direction.
Yeah.
And I have to, within myself, I have to discern, where is it, Marianne, that you just don't like his personality? You know? Because his personality is not an issue here. So there is a dangerous shutting down, and this was even true during the Obama administration. There's a dangerous shutting down of the whistleblowers. I realize that.
Yes.
And he was a whistleblower. Yes.
I have a question about, in order for humanity to still continue in the next...
I'm sorry, so what was it again?
I have a question about what will you do for humanity to continue in the next 50 years? What will you do to protect the environmental law?
Okay.
Not just in the U.S., but what else can be done?
Can we repeat the
Well,
question?
he's talking about the environmental crisis. So first of all, we have to realize humanity has to decide whether or not to continue this evolutionary journey or not. Because if we do not reverse the climate crisis over the next 12 years, some people think less than that, we're talking about whether or not this generation just basically elects to end it.
Exactly.
And every day, you turn on television, you pick up a newspaper, and it looks worse and worse and worse and worse. We need more than a world-class environmentalist head of the EPA. We need more than to make sure that no ex-chemical company executives or ex-oil company executives are either leading the EPA or taking any kind of positions in it whatsoever. We need to declare the debate over. We need to have the EPA be an absolute magnet for world-class environmental scientists, sustainability experts. But the entire American people, we need to be enrolled in this. We must sequester the carbon. We must reforest. We must develop sustainable energy, sustainable transportation. We must deal with the animal factory farming. We must deal with all that nitrous oxide and methane. We must have a Green New Deal. And it's not just that we must. It is going to be exciting. We need to move from a war economy to a peace economy. We need to move from a dirty economy to a clean economy. And it can't be a part-time effort. No more. This is a generation that is called. You couldn't be a part-time abolitionist. You couldn't be a part-time woman suffragette. You couldn't be part-time committed to desegregation. Ladies and gentlemen, we've partied. This is one thing you have to give to terrorists. These people aren't kidding. These people are disciplined. I've never thought or even imagined a kind of sort of sometimes when it's convenient committed terrorist. These people are serious. They're going to do whatever it takes to effectuate their worldview. We have to become that
And there's
serious now.
25% of the Hong Kongers on the streets, in the streets.
We have to be, we can't be kind of sort of sometimes when it's convenient committed to love. We can't be sometimes kind of sometimes when it's convenient committed to saving the planet. That's what I meant by saying that our problem isn't that we're so busy, it's that we're not busy enough on the things that need to be done. We spend too much time, we allow too much of our energy, too much of our bandwidth, too much of our screen time, too much of everything to be sucked away by ultimately unimportant things. And there's something that happens in your individual life. There's something I have worked all my professional life for 30 years. I've worked up close and personal with people in deep transition due to deep problems. And I know what happens when somebody is told the test results came back and they're cancer. I know what happens when somebody is told your child's addicted to heroin. I know what happens when somebody is told that your business is over, you're bankrupt. And what I have seen over and over and over again is that in the first 5 minutes, all these stupid preoccupations, which ultimately mean nothing, just fall away. And what comes forward is a nobility and an intelligence and a bravery and a courage that's lying inside here, but it's covered over by all this meaninglessness that we've allowed to define our lives. That's why so much of the change has to be inside us if we're to make the changes outside. A board certified.
Right now, there is 1 in 59 students, children in America that have diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. MIT just released a new study that by 2025, there's going to be 1 in 2 children with autism. I love your idea for the Department of Children and Youth, Department of Peace. How is this going to play into special education? Because right now, what I see is all of these teachers underpaid, undertrained. Most general education teachers have at least 1 to 5 students in their class that have a diagnosis of autism and they have no idea what to do with them. These kids are putting their heads around the wall, coming from the bruises all up and down their arms.
Make me president, I'll call you. So this is the deal. Then I'm actually not kidding. So this is the deal. This is why I want a U.S. Department of Children and Youth as opposed to just more money for education. It's so much bigger than that. We have children who are chronically traumatized before preschool. We have to start at birth. We have to start with what's happening in the womb and the nutrition of women who are pregnant. We have to start with the fact that American women have a relatively high rate of maternal mortality. We have to talk about the nutrition of children. We have to talk, you've probably already heard me talk about the fact we don't just have a healthcare system, we have a sickness care system. We have to talk about all things like chemical policies. We have to talk about food policies. We have to talk about agricultural policies. We have to talk about environmental policies, none of which are appreciated by chemical companies, food companies, big agribusiness giants, etc. Ladies and gentlemen, I haven't taken money from these people. It's not my world. Whatever. But this is where we have to go. And so what I find with children, what I find in you, is what I find all over this country. I find it with early child experts, children's health. I find it with social worker. I find it with education. With education, obviously, we know what we need to do. The teachers need to be paid. We need to get rid of the high stakes testing, all of that. But it goes so much deeper. But what I see, and I'll leave you with this because I think it's important, because this is when I say to you, we have serious problems. We have unlimited possibilities. Those unlimited possibilities are just a gossamer film away, and I'll tell you why. When it comes to what to do with our children, when it comes to what to do about the environment, when it comes to what to do in order to build peace domestically and internationally, when it comes to how to fix everything that needs to be fixed, when it comes to how to heal, how to transform everything that needs to be transformed, we have the people. We have the people, we have the projects, we have the best practices. We just have a political system that's lumbering. It's this old dinosaur that looks like this, but the people are ready. We have people all over this country who know exactly what you're saying. But what happens is that the real problem solvers, the real peacekeepers, the real experts on the things that need to be done now are so under-resourced. They are so underpaid. They are so underfunded that you have people who are doing the work that could possibly save this next generation working to do a fundraiser. Maybe we can make $50,000. Maybe we can make $100,000 when our government is giving money to the very forces they have to resist and to reject to the tune of hundreds of millions.
Yes.
That's called corruption. Let's change something.
Marianne Williamson, ladies and gentlemen. Wow. So if I can just take, give me one, well, I'd say 1 minute, but I'd be lying. Give me maybe 2 minutes. That's a rock star move. You know, I served in the United States Congress, so believe me, I know just how much change we need in this country. And when I heard Marianne Williamson was running for president, I signed on. You may remember I was the first congressman from an early state to endorse a then senator named Barack Obama, who at the time was 6% in the polls when I signed on. So I think I know a little bit about real message, real politics, and what we need.